Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Digital Artcast. We are now at year's end. It has been a great 2020. I just wanted to, before we rolled on this next episode, talk about my thanks for everybody who's been listening. We've made a lot of progression and we've had a really great year and just so many amazing guests that it's been almost unbelievable to, the caliber of people that came on to talk to me. So just a general thanks to all my guests that have came on and talked to me, and of course for everybody here who has listened, not only this year but probably multiple years since the podcast inception. And as you've noticed, we are changing formats and slightly that, we're trying to expand our realm of understanding and bring in different disciplines from around the industry, not just visual artists, but other types of artists, other types of people within the industry, just to broaden the horizon. I know that the podcast's initial focus was, of course, artists in the industry, but I think it's good to just always step outside your circle and intake as much information as you can from different sources, because then I think it just makes you just a more well-rounded person in general. So again with today, a slight change up where we have a great guest, an amazing guest in fact, but one who has a slightly different discipline in the fact that he is, he's an audio engineer, he's a composer. He is probably best known for his work on, multiple games and movies across the industry, working on sound design. And it was just a great honour to get him along to talk to us about his work and everything that he's done. So if you guys can please help me welcome along today's guest, Mr. Ross Tregenza. Hey, Ross.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yes, a pleasure indeed. So I mean, just initially, the reason I think, funny enough, I was already trying to get you on the podcast before you announced this, but now that you have, congratulations on your work in Cyberpunk.
Thank you very much. It's an incredible honor to be part of that game. It's so huge and so cool.
Yes, it's, I think, they were saying stuff like, they turned a profit on day one. Yeah. It's like, one of the fastest selling PC games, over like 1 million users on Steam. It's pretty crazy, the hype that's surrounding that game just now. It's not...
It feels like a landmark in video game history, really. It's really cool.
Yeah, I think just also because people have been really anticipating this game for so long. It's, I think that the first time I heard of it was not long after I left my job as an engineer to try and pursue my dream. So, like 2013, 2012 or something was when, the rumours were starting. I think the initial kind of talks about, they'd bought the license, they were building a game.
Yeah.
So like something like 8 years. It's crazy. Yeah, crazy. So apart from Cyberpunk, obviously, that's a big accolade now, obviously, for that to be on your resume. But, your work goes very far back. Not trying to make you sound old, Ross, but but at the same time, yeah, you've had your hands in the industry for a while now. So for people who don't know you, could you just run just a quick intro of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I've worked as either a composer or sound designer for, like I say, it's a long time now. I think my composing work predates my sound design by a few years. I think it's been 17 years of composing for games now. First one being Time Splitters 2 that I just did one track for, and then that with the composer and audio director Graham Norgate on that became a long-term working relationship. And we worked. I did a bit more for Time Splitters 3. Then I joined Free Radical that in Nottingham, not around anymore, but an amazing games company. So from there, trying to sort of get the sequence right, we worked on the game Haze, and then a Star Wars game that sadly never came out. I was down at Rebellion in Oxford, and we worked on Alien vs Predator and a few other titles there. Then up to Crytek, where we worked on the Crisis games, that was awesome. Real pleasure working on those. That was Crisis 1, 2, and 3.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and then what we got from there? Then Homefront, which was that we became Deep Silver Dambuster out of the ashes of Crytek Nottingham. Then from up to Manchester for Star Citizen, back down to Nottingham again for Sumo Nottingham, where we've done Team Sonic Racing and Hotshot Racing. And then there's been a load of sort of freelance mostly composing for the freelance work in between that.
Right.
Gears of
Right.
War, Wolfenstein Youngblood, and a few other titles.
Right, grand. So yeah, definitely a packed resume in terms of just things you've worked on. I mean, even the fact that you were one of the original team for the Crysis games is a huge accolade in itself. I know those games, of course, were legendary even back then, but now, of course, it's like, I think one of the games that everybody looks to is the gold standard for FPSs and just games in general. I know we had Marek Madji, we had Maciej Kutiara on not too long ago, and he was also part of the original Crysis team as well, and the art side. And I think anybody who's been around to have touched that at one point is definitely, has some kind of legendary title anyway, because it's such an icon now in the industry. But then, of course, you went freelance. You've like you said, you've done stuff for Wolfenstein and other pieces, around, and composing, doing some design for trailers, right? For cuts for trailers, for movies and stuff like that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's funny actually how different the worlds of composing for video game and composing for film are. Like, I've done very little in the realm of films, really, more just trailer.
Mm-hmm.
But you think,
right,
considering the final results of the sound design and the composing of you're ending up with music and sound design. You'd think there'd be a huge amount of like commonality in those two industries, but they're incredibly different. It's kind of fascinating how bizarrely different they are. Like if I talk to someone from a sound designer or a composer from the film industry, it's like we're both fascinated by each other's disciplines, but they're insanely different. It's really strange.
Right. Yeah. I think it's even where sometimes you'll try to understand that, the visual identity of games, you'll design for games as a concept artist or concept designer or environment artist, whatever. But then when you switch to film, yeah, there is definitely a different aesthetic. I know going to events previously, I've spoke to both games artists and movie artists, and yeah, they do seem to live in different realms, although primarily their job is to solve problems visually and, draw and paint. So, I mean, for you, what have you felt has been your gut feeling of where you feel most comfortable? Do you think you live more for games at this current moment?
Yeah, I mean, I will always be interested in sound designing and composing for anything really. Anything that comes up that's intriguing that I can write music for will be a pleasure to do. But my background now is so heavily in games, and
right.
Yeah, I've been very lucky, been very grateful for the opportunities I've had and everything, and I'm kind of pretty deep into game audio and game composing now. So I'm sure that'll probably be the main slant of my work forever. And maybe there'll be some opportunities in film or other areas. But if I was to be working forever in video games now, I'd be more than happy with that. It's
what's the general vibe on how you found your voice in the industry? I mean, like, was it initially that you came from a background of creating music for yourself, and then you wanted to make that a full-time job? So was it just that you wanted to make music for anybody at the time, or did you have already in your mind very early on that you wanted to compose for games?
I think I kind of from this like older generation of sound designers and composers for games, that a lot of us really came from just a general music background, sort of, and were fans of video games and drifted into the industry in that way. Obviously, a lot of young sound designers now will go to university and stuff and study very directly for that role. But I was I was a musician. I had a sort of a electro-y industrial band, and I was trying to take over the world with my band, which didn't work. As time went on, I was happily doing my band, and I think one day I met Graham Norgate, the audio director from Free Radical, and he got me to do just one song for one of his games, and that was just kind of an eye opener. I hadn't really, as much as I loved the music in games, it just hadn't really clicked with me that is something I could be doing. Like I could merge my love for video games with my love for music. And after that, we went on to Time Splitters 3, and I got more involved. And as time went on, I started realizing it's like this is something that could be my life from now on. So it was kind of a slow dawning realization that this is probably what I should be doing with my life.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, I think it's even interesting to talk about your beginnings, because it does also sound like a lot of the guys I spoke to who are visual artists, they drew and painted as a hobby, and then eventually learned that, oh, people are paid to do this for games. Like, how do I get a slice of that cake? So, it's been a very common thing, I think, for creatives, is that there was this whole art explosion in the 80s and 90s, and then all of a sudden, like this industry came along, and then people realized that they could be part of it because it was a creative industry and they were creatives. So, I mean, I think it's just like, you found your calling, your home, because there was an industry to take it in, essentially. So, yeah, I mean, is that something that, I mean, pretty early on, I'm guessing it was hard still to make a living even back then when you were working on games. It was probably a very, because the games industry itself is so young, right? So what were the early days of composing back then compared to now? What were they like?
Yeah, I mean, when I was first doing just bits and pieces of work for people for games, I was really still just jumping on any opportunity, but it wasn't enough to make a living. I was still working just sort of jobs in shops and things like that, just to rent. And I was hoping one day I could get like a place in a studio and work full time, or then hopefully eventually also take on a lot more freelance work. But it's I'm sure it's the same with any sort of freelance creative discipline. It's that initial mountain is pretty steep to just to get
to climb.
Yeah, to get that first work and to sort of build some momentum. It's like sort of wading through jam for the first years, just trying to get that work.
Yeah. No, I mean, I definitely feel like there's a time and a place for people to try that freelance world. I think, especially when you're younger, you try to venture out and find your own voice in the industry. And then some people kind of stay that way forever, or eventually will try and go back into the fold and, find, a studio that suits their kind of creative outlet or their needs at the time for family or for work or whatever. I mean, you've been freelance now for about 4 or 5 years now, right? So, I mean, what's the general consensus moving forward? Do you think you would want to try and eventually maybe venture back into studios kind of full time, or are you still kind of loving what you're doing?
In a really awesome but quite unusual situation that I work full time as the audio lead and composer for Sumo Nottingham, but but they also when the studio was very young, the director at the time invited me down and wanted me to start the audio team, and I'd said to him, I do a lot of freelance now, and it wouldn't be interrupting my work that I do during day work hours, but it's something that I feel very passionate about and want to continue with. So I have an unusual contract with them that, as long as it's not any sort of direct competitor or anything that's gonna, and certainly that it doesn't interrupt my work for them, they're happy. That Sumo Nottingham are happy for me to compose as a freelancer outside of my work hours. So I basically I kind of do two jobs, I guess. I'm working primarily for Sumo Nottingham, and then when things like Cyberpunk come along, then I spend my all the rest of my time doing that. I'm passive about my music.
I mean, that's got to be intense, because I think, as you'll probably well know, holding down one job is difficult enough. Never mind, I'm saying this, I know people who do, who, have a full-time job at like Creative Assembly or Sega or other different companies. But then, of course, at night they come home and do stuff for Magic the Gathering or any kind of freelance stuff. So those people do exist. But I think, more because I don't understand fully your pipeline, how you would, spend all day audio engineering stuff for Sumo, and then also taking on a project like Cyberpunk, because of course, Sumo has some massive IPs and some huge games that they work on, but then Cyberpunk itself was like such an undertaking. In essence, we could probably talk about that later in more depth as well, but then how did that opportunity come initially then for you to work with CD Projekt Red?
That was really through just a contact of mine. Colin Walder, who's an audio coder for the game, he joined the industry at Free Radical, the same place that I started in the industry back in about 2007, 2008. He went from Free Radical up to Rockstar and worked on GTA 5, and then over for The Witcher, and then on to Cyberpunk, because he's got an awesome CV. But he's a great guy, and we've always enjoyed working with each other when opportunities have arrived. And on Cyberpunk, they were working on the game and realized that they had a bit of a shortfall in terms of like all the adverts and TV trailers and things like that in the game, and they realized they needed somebody to do it. So, being the lovely chap that he is, he spoke to me and then put me forward. So I checked with Sumo Nottingham, and they were happy with that. So we went ahead with it, and that was the beginning of a lot of crazy fun work.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, I don't know if this is a specific you can talk about, but then how long ago were you contacted for the initial conversation about working on the game? Was that like a few years back now, or?
I'm trying to think. It's kind of a blur now. I think it's about over a year ago. I'd like to say. I think we started talking about that it might happen. It might even be like a year and a half or longer ago now. And I think the work in earnest began about a year ago, I think now.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, even then, a year might seem a long time to people, but then again, depending on what the scope was for what you were working on, time is just an illusion, because if they wanted you to create, several hundred jingles or TV adverts, then of course you think to yourself, how do I split that over 12 months? How am I going to, manage that? How am I going to break it up? I mean, in essence, I think it's different as well, because you talked about, the difference between games and films in terms of composing, but then if you're then composing things like TV jingles or adverts, is there also a different process to that as well, although it's still within games?
Yeah, it's weirdly, it's kind of become like a specialty of mine, I guess, for creating in-world music.
Okay.
I did it for Star Citizen and Homefront and
Right.
They're all this music, like sometimes played over the radio, sometimes TV adverts, things like that. But it is actually it's quite different from pure scoring for video games. There's sort of different requirements and different limitations. I mean, you have to, especially for Cyberpunk, we talked about it a lot, me and Colin and Martin, the audio director, when I started. And a lot my stuff for Cyberpunk is designed to be layered very heavily. So kind of almost, Blade Runner is not really the reference for the game, although obviously there's comparisons and stuff. But we did want that sort of multi-layered oversaturation of in terms of the visuals and the audio. Like when you're out in the street, there's just content everywhere. So the music couldn't be too chunky, really, and it needed to have a lot of movement in it. So I had to design all the music to modulates and moves all through all the music, and it's never super intense, and the music can be quite aggressive, but it's never too sort of thick, because if you've got a lot of these heavy, thick songs with no movement, if you stack 5 or 10 of those, it just becomes horrible sort of dissonant noise. And so it was an interesting challenge. It was cool. I had to try and when I was writing them, I had to sort of move them all around, sort of the frequency range and stuff like that, and make sure that they all stack nicely, and it was cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's good to be, I say vastly, different from the stuff you've worked on previously, because, I don't know how many open world games you've done, but I know that, having played it, recently, of course, I was one of the initial guys who pre-ordered it, but having played it now, you do feel like there is that sensory overload. Like you walk into the world for the first time and there's just so much going on. I mean, not just visually, but also audibly, the people's conversations, the music in the background, jingles, TV news reports, people talking amongst their fighting or shouting, and, the traffic noise. I mean, it's obviously like any living, breathing city. There's just an overload, sensory overload that's constantly happening. And like you said, multi-layered. So you were, that's probably meaning that, your adverts or jingles will exist in one plane, but there will be so much, within that spectrum that's also going on at the same time. Yeah. I mean, the things as well, I'm quite curious, when you talk about jingles or TV adverts and stuff like that, were you also concepting what the ideation would be behind that as well, or were they giving you briefs or cues for what they needed specifically?
They would send me, some of them were sort of still work in progress, and they were kind of sending them in batches as time went on, like as the other teams, the artists and stuff were working on them. But there was me, and I would kind of do 10 or 20 at a time and send them to Martin and Colin for a review, and then we had some just chats online about direction and stuff like that. Like initially, there was a lot more heavy direction initially, as there usually is with this kind of thing, just while I was kind of heading in the wrong direction here and there.
Right.
And the biggest and most lasting feedback that I got on it from Martin was that like my first stuff that I sent him, I was kind of thinking this cyberpunk, this like 90s industrial vibe to it, and a lot of the work that I was doing sounded pretty similar. It all had kind of a strong, fairly similar identity. And he's saying like this is supposed to be like music from 100 different companies with 100 different identities and stuff. So you just need to not make it sound like one guy has written all of this music, because that's what it sounded like.
Right.
So I had to go back to the drawing board and just try and learn as many different musical styles and just approach each one as, really force myself to be really dramatically different. I would open up like instruments and things that I've never used before, learn like new scales and crazy stuff, just to make each one sound different from the last. So, which was it was really exciting to do that. It was difficult, but awesome.
Yeah, I could imagine as well. Maybe even the instrumentation you would have to seek out to make it sound different. I mean, I know it's probably really cliche at this point, but back when I was looking at the early versions of Doom before it came out, and Mick Gordon was getting spotlights on the process he was doing, I did find it interesting to think how he processed audio, and even the fact that on one episode the kind of preview that came out before the game release was like he bought this thing called, I think it was a Polyvox, or it was like a Russian keyboard that like he didn't have any idea how to operate, but like just plugged it in and started pressing things, and he was like, oh, that sounds really interesting, let's capture that. So I mean, in essence, were you trying to be as experimental as you could be with instruments?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the thing is, because I've got pretty much every software instrument under the sun, and a lot of times,
right,
I get there's like companies like Native Instruments and Arturia and stuff like that. They got these big sort of bundles of instruments, and out of like the 30 or 100 that you get, there'll be ones that are kind of my go-tos. And I had sort of just stray from that sort of path that I've always been on of like, hey, I know the tools I like to use, and just try using things that I just never had any need for before. Just like gamelans and Rhodes pianos and like 70s Motown loops and things like that. So I just found myself just sort of I would look at the visuals they sent me and be okay, so this has got like a Egyptian vibe, but also feels somehow a bit 70s. So let's see what we got that can do something with that. And I've kind of just rinsed everything I owned, like every single possible tool. Like when I'm down to like jingle number 120, I'm like, okay, I got to make this sound new. What have I got left that I could try it?
Yeah. You're trying to like glue other instruments together and try and form some kind of Frankenstein like mandolin that's never been used. Yeah, but I think because even with the audio world, I think a lot of guys will. Because I mean, they just don't understand it, but we'll usually narrow their mind down to be like, oh, well, use a piano, keyboard, you've got a guitar, a bass, a drum set. That's the 4 instruments that exist, right? The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. That's like all the things you'll ever need to make music. But then, even the other week, I think I was watching some random clip from Graham Norton, and he had Bill Bailey on, and he was talking about this instrument he'd learned in lockdown called the mandala, and I was like, that's a mandolin, right? But then. Later learn, no, it's a separate instrument. Altogether, it's more kind of earthy, more tony. But there is really, when it comes to music, there is a world of instruments out there, right? There's just so much.
It's amazing. It's one of the many things I love about music. It's that it's just an endless, infinite possibility to learn. And like, I must know 1% of the available instruments that there are to use and stuff. And it's just researching it itself and learning about all these weird instruments and things is always such a joy. There's just so much to learn from so many cultures and stuff. It's so cool.
Yeah, I think even from Western culture, right? Because I mean, even when you look at a lot of the Eastern culture instruments as well, there's so much. I think there was one that my partner brought back not too long ago. I think it was from Cambodia, but it's like a small round. It looks like a wooden bowl, but it has metal prongs at the top of it, and it looks like a guitar in the way it's set up. But when you press down on the metal prongs and let them flick back up, they make these really interesting like prong sounds that like Yeah, we probably not talking about. That's what I'm saying. When you even go outside of the Western market, right? There's so much even within that, right?
Well, there's people now designing instruments for composers that are sort of very specifically made to produce interesting sounds for film and video games. There's like the Waterphone.
Okay, yeah.
Alien. It's like a big bowl with huge metal prongs, like 2 foot metal prongs sticking up, and you bow it or hit it, and it does those iconic, shimmery, terrifying metal sounds you get in horror films. Or there's the apprehension engine, which I think it's a guy he's made instruments for Hans Zimmer and stuff, but he's made this. It's like a big box with weird things stuck on it and like wheels that you turn and stuff like that, and it's purely designed to make like the most horrifying, terrifying sounds in the world. And it's a box full of horror. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, like there's some stuff that's even like, I mean, people who have projects they want to, kickstart. Funny because I'm about to talk about it, but I came across a Kickstarter not too long ago, and it was called the Theory Board. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
No, I haven't.
Okay, I'll need to send it to you later. But basically, it's a guy who's invented an instrument where it's like an LED board. It isn't really like a conventional keyboard. It looks like a computer keyboard, like with individual small keys. But the theme is that you can press a button, and as you're pressing the keys, it plays chords automatically, and then there's buttons like just next to it that if you want to have the harmony up or down, you just press that button and it automatically will play the harmony or the octave above it, or like it's. I think it's mostly designed as an audio synth for people who don't want to learn how to play music traditionally, which kind of obviously loses some of the aesthetic of like learning how to play music. But it was a really interesting project. I think it's more actually aimed at people who want to make music, but necessarily don't know how to form a chord on a piano or an octave or span, keys. So, there's
that kind of in that sort of thinking. I think, like, I know it feels like a trend with a lot of composer friends of mine recently that we're all sort of setting ourselves up a different space in our homes and our studios, moving away from our Macs and PCs to have like a sort of a musical space to change our thinking a little bit. And I've done it as well. I've set up a piano, and then I've got into modular synthesizers. So I've got a load of crazy modules and things all plugged into each other, but it's disconnected from my Mac and from Cubase and all my regular setup, so that I can physically move myself away from my normal thinking space and try some stuff that's a bit more experimental. And that was hugely helpful for Cyberpunk and for other projects that I'm working on. It's just, it kind of moves you out of your normal patterns that have become a little too easy.
Yeah, I was going to. I mean, that's really interesting. You're kind of explaining that, where I know as a visual artist, kind of paint and draw on a 3D model. But even when I want to do some painting or drawing, I've set up a space away from a computer because, Photoshop's great and it's an industry standard and whatever. But there's sometimes when you just want to splash a bit of paint across a bit of paper and maybe not even see how it works. When the pixels fall perfectly in each individual square on the screen, you want to just see how it moves, or it soaks, or it changes color as it mixes with other things. And I think there's so much emphasis, or there has been over the last maybe 20 years, on digital skills, especially because games were so digitally focused. But I think because that's kind of been done to death now, people are looking for the escape, right? They're looking for the thing that not everybody's doing, or the thing that switches their brain to a different mode, right?
I think you're right. I think that's exactly what it is. And it's a real trend with sound guys. I think we're all finding that. We've been using, whichever music software we use for so long now that I think people were very skilled, but in that software. But yeah, I think I could write a song in Cubase with the sound turned down, and it would be okay, just because I've got so many go-to tools and the basic skills. But I think that's pretty unhealthy. Right. So I really like this new trend of trying to move myself out of that and listen again and actually sort of use new tools and avoid safety in the music.
Yeah, I definitely. We all know the cliche thing as well to say that you step outside your circle, outside your comfort zone, but it is really as simple as that. Like when you take away even in Photoshop, when people are like, cool, there's a color wheel that has 16 gajillion, that's a real number, colors that are actively ready to be used, but then people have started groups where it's like, you you only get 2 colors a week, or you can only use the round brush and no other brush, and and
that's great.
that limitation, yeah, that's what I'm saying. The limitation is what actually makes you more creative, right? So if you've only got like 2 pedals and a guitar, or you've got like only 1 piano and no synthesizers, then like, well, how does your sound now translate into other things? That's the thing you want. That's where the creative really comes out, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, completely agree.
Yeah. So I mean, when it comes to, you've done, you're doing Cyberpunk, you're doing all these other games. Are you still actively a musician outside of your work? Are you gigging? Are you writing stuff, solo that's you're putting out on Spotify and SoundCloud? Or
yeah, it's obviously my output for my musical projects outside of my main work has slowed down as my freelancing and composing for Sumo and stuff has escalated, because there's only a certain number of hours in the day. But I have an industrial electro band called Goteki that I've had for 20 years now. That
wow.
Me and my bandmate Alistair, we really now gigs for us are just a nice opportunity to get out and perform the music, meet people, and hang out and stuff. Like we're happy with the idea. We're not going to be on Top of the Pops. I guess there is no Top of the Pops. It hasn't been for very long.
Showing your age now, Ross.
Yeah, I still released an album for that band at the beginning of the year, and I kind of release cover versions and bits and bobs through the year. And then I do solo releases just as Ross Tregenza on Spotify. And again, the output's not a huge amount, but I try and release like an EP and a few spot songs and a few covers each year, and just sort of keep things tracking along. It's kind of I'll do that music as like a treat if I finished all my sort of professional compositional work. I'm like, I've got 4 hours left. I'll might do a little bit of Goteki, or a little solo project, or do a cover of a Bowie song or something.
I mean, it's interesting to think as well how, even just on a tangent, but, so TikTok is a thing now, obviously, and it's a very active thing, but it's crazy to see the resurgence of some musicians' work, coming back onto that app and being used as either, people dancing to it or doing, voiceovers or whatever. But I think the interesting thing I saw with a couple of people I know who were independent musicians, they were actually making TikToks with their work in some form, and then of course if it goes viral and people obviously rebrand it and bring it back out, it then regenerates another voice for like that song. I'm trying to mind what the song's called, but the line in it's how bizarre, and like that's been, you can see people picking up royalty checks for that like 30 years later, and they're like, what the fuck is happening? Why are people listening to my music again? But it was the same when like people started rickrolling right across the internet. Rick Astley was like, what the fuck is happening? Like, my song is blowing up. What's going on? But do you find that like weird? Have you ever tried to mix your sound with any social media vibes? Do you think it's something that is good for an artist, or do you try to kind of stay well clear of it?
It's a difficult one. I think it's completely valid, and I've got a huge amount of respect for friends in the industry and people I don't know, but who are doing such a great job on social media for maintaining their presence and stuff, and right. Things that really really resonate with people, and they'll get a zillion billion hits and stuff. I've never had a lot of luck with it, really. every 5 years, I'll try. I'll think to myself, okay, I've got such a cool idea. This is going to be like a real viral sensation, and it'll help my profile online. It never is.
Yeah.
I spent a weekend working on something, and 3 years later, it's on like 250 hits.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just the ideation and also just the repetition, because I know for some people, you'll see one TikTok that's blown up, but then of course it's like, it was like their third and they've already made 50. So it's like, it's going back to one that blew up 3 years ago, and there's no real rhyme or reason to it. What I think is annoying a lot of creatives, because you think you'll have a good idea at the time, but then it might not pick up till a year later, right? That's when it blows up or something happens. You're like, what? Where did that? It's the weirdest thing. Even on Instagram the other day, I was like posting. I would post regularly on my Instagram and get maybe 10, 15 likes at the most. And then I posted a picture of one of my art books that I got. I got the Darksiders art book, Joe Mad, and it's up to nearly like 100 likes. And I'm like, what was different? What was the key element that made that thing more popular? And it's difficult. And then even in music, it's even harder because, 5 seconds goes into a tweet or an Instagram post, but, for a song, you're composing that for multiple hours, a day, a week. I mean, how have you tried to maybe utilize social media for maybe not just your brand, but also your band and your side gigs? I mean, do you feel it's helping at all with your image, or do you just try to rely on just putting music up?
I think so. I don't think you can really avoid it or be snooty about the importance of it these days. It's crucial to at least sort of make sure, like if somebody finds your name in the credits of like, say if someone's playing Cyberpunk now and then they look through the credits and check out all the people that did the music, it's just stupid and kind of just disrespectful to people enjoying the music not to have some kind of online presence that allows people to find your work and how to see more of it and stuff. So I think, there's got to be a very least a base level of maintaining all your social media and all that kind of stuff. And then, I'm in terms of my freelance work, like with Cyberpunk at the moment, obviously I'm heavily capitalizing on it. I'm talking about it anywhere that I can and updating all my social accounts and stuff because other potential people that might want my music in their games in the future will be looking at that. So you'd just be really silly not to capitalize on the good sides of social media for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always the iceberg theory, right? Where people will look at like, oh, you worked in Cyberpunk, this must be your first big break. And then you're like, nah. Like I worked in Crisis, I worked in all these different films. Like it's one of these things where even people I know who have worked in Cyberpunk now as artists, people will look at them in the credits and be like, oh, great, you finally got to work on a AAA game. Lo and behold, they've worked on 60 beforehand and just it's maybe not had the social span, but it's like it's the wave, I think, of instant notification and the wave of just attention once you work on something that big, that has so many eyes on it because of course we all know CD Projekt Red have done a stellar job of hyping this game up.
Totally. So I mean, I'd be a complete idiot not to be riding that wave a little bit now. Obviously, I'm not going to be annoying everyone by still going on every day about my work in a few weeks' time, but hopefully for the next week or so, while it's in the news and everyone's talking about it, I'd be an idiot not to sort of
to capitalize on it. Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I think it's interesting as well where a lot of artists, I think it's even quite just a British thing, right? Like it's the thing where you don't want to talk about your accolades too much. You don't want to scream from the mountains that, I mean, I know people in my life who have PhDs and are doctors, but they don't go by doctor. They just go by Gavin. Like it's a thing where you don't want to seem, too ostentatious or too,
The whole thing feels pretty uncomfortable to me, really. I'm trying to work past it because I think, like we know it's important for my future career as a composer that I do, like, while I'm in the spotlight right now, make people aware of it. But it feels really uncomfortable to me. Just it feels like boasting and
yeah, it's difficult. It's good to be. Yeah, I mean, in essence, again, you've worked on many AAA experiences beforehand, but then what do you think was the biggest takeaway from working in Cyberpunk? What do you feel like was one of the major lessons? Maybe you could obviously there'd be multiple, but maybe some takeaways from working on that team and on that game. What do you feel was your take back in your own work?
I think weirdly there's a lot of technical aspects of this one that I realized I needed to improve on. It's like when I was just a musician in terms of I wasn't working in professional games industry capacity, my sort of project structuring and the way I built my music and stuff like that, I would throw things in and try it, and everything was named wrong, and they'd be called like song 1, idea 3, and things like that, and everything was just a horrendous mess, but it didn't matter. And like the work for Cyberpunk sort of escalated over time. That I would do some, and then they're like, actually, we think we'd like to do a little more and stuff like that. And I ended up with 130 different jingles, and each of those, rarely they were the first version. So I was talking about multiple hundreds of different projects with relevant files and things like that. And some point in the middle of that, I really thought, okay, I need to be a lot more organized with this stuff. So I think it was good for, it's not super exciting, but my sense of like discipline for my creative work has improved dramatically in the last few years. It's like, particularly when you're working with like external clients and things, and you don't know when they're going to say, actually, can you break that song down and just give us the drums for that one? You know, I think you kind of, I can't, I lost them.
Oh no, yeah.
So you, I think it's been a good few years of learning to be a little more disciplined and structured in work from the beginning, and just head off those problems from the beginning.
Yeah, I think as well, you know, with freelance work, it's always different because every single client, every single studio will have a different way of working. So especially when it comes from, you know, one audio director at CD Projekt to an audio director at Sumo, like, you know, they all have their own, you know, visual library and their own audio library and their own visual way of, you know, composing and bringing things together. I mean, in essence, I think, is there one particular style, I think, that you would classify your sound as? Do you think that, you know, you could pretty much make anything at this point, or do you think there is like an aesthetic or a style that you have attached to your sound?
Well, I think like you never really have the luxury at the beginning of being a composer of specializing that much. Like if a job comes in, you got to say yes, pretty much, what it is. But I do feel like I've got strengths, and things have been going really well. I'm really happy with the progress in the last few years. So if I can start specializing, which really is a luxury, and I'm hoping I get that luxury, then I think sort of darker edge, tense music, more that sort of more dark adult area as opposed to the lighter,
right?
Yeah, like sort of smartphone kind of games with that lighter sort of jingly music, or adverts with that jingly happy music. Yeah, I can do that stuff if I have to, but it doesn't come naturally to me. But things like horror games and games like Cyberpunk and stuff like that, I feel very comfortable in that area, and I really enjoy that darker, more aggressive tone in the music. So I'm hoping with a little luck, if things keep going well, I can just keep specializing in towards like, I guess, like sci-fi, horror and thrillers and things like that, which have that aggressive dark edge to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think horrors in itself, you know, is a genre that can be expanded upon. I mean, I know I've watched several videos on the genre. It's never something I've really loved to watch. I mean, I didn't particularly enjoy getting, you know, the jump scare thing, where I think that was a very big trend for a long time, was the jump scares. But I know that the tense atmosphere used to having stuff like, you know, Ridley Scott's work with Alien, and even, you know, when you look at the original Cyberpunk, you know, influence, which was Blade Runner, there was so much layering with audio and that built tense atmospheres. You know, the scene where the guy's like, you know, pushing the guy's eyes into his socket and stuff, and you hear the crescendo coming up with the music, and the whole thing's getting all eerie. I definitely think horror is a very tough thing to tackle because it's hard to create that mood, right? It's hard to create a sound you think that will bring people to the edge of their seats and obviously raise the hair in the back of their necks. Is that something that you've tried to be, you know, involved in? Have you ever actively tried to score games of that genre, or even tried to think about doing stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, some of the Crisis work, that was more sound design stuff, but
right.
What else have I got? There's been a few sort of horror related titles over the years. And it's an interesting challenge. It's also, I think a lot of modern horror, especially film horror, has tended to, it's got a little soft, and it tends to sort of, it guides the listener in a way that I think is a really bad idea. Like a lot of films will signpost something terrifying is going to happen soon. I don't mean that this is a jump scare, but I think in a lot of very modern, very clever horror films like Hereditary or The Lighthouse, which there was horror in the music. The music wasn't comforting you and telling you something scary is about to happen, look out. It was like disturbing in its own different way, which is really interesting to me. It's certainly something I hope I get a chance to explore in some way down the line.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was something somebody told me a while back, you know, about, you know, the difference between sounds and aesthetics in different genres. And I think with horror, one of the biggest things I learned that was interesting from one of my friends who's a kind of horror movie nut was it wasn't just about the sound you put in, it was about the sound you leave out, right? It's sometimes building to a terrifying moment or something that's quite pivotal in the story can be an absolute, removal of all audio cues. Like the silence is always more uncomfortable than, I think for some people having audio there makes them feel more comfortable in some certain situations. But then when you walk into a void or a vacuum, that's when the real terror comes, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like the film Hereditary was a great example of that, because they kind of subverted the horror film score ideas. That they set up like a cadence and a tone for when something bad was going to happen, with like a clicking, repeating rhythm, and then they started using it when nothing bad happened in the film, and didn't use it when terrifying things were happening. So it kind of
Right.
out of whack in a way that's just, I think, much more interesting than
definitely.
listener.
Yeah. I mean, in essence, I think, when you talk about genre and style, it is something that, will come with many, many years of, freelancing and trying different projects and leasing yourself out to different ideas. I mean, I know for the 2D, 3D guys in my industry, you want to aesthetically please people and try different things at the start because you want to be open to all different types of work. But then you will eventually find that niche, that thing that you love the most, and then try as best you can, basically, to have a career just doing that one thing. But then I think also that's a double-edged sword, right? Because that also makes you sometimes feel trapped. I don't know.
Exactly. I mean, we did the Team Sonic Racing, a Sonic the Hedgehog game, was it about 2 years ago now? And before that, I think I'd done 9 games in a row where you can stab someone in the neck with a knife. It was kind of nice to have something nice, and it was a refreshing game to work on. And Jun Senue, the composer from Sega, he was a great guy, very talented, and he let me do just some music for some aspects of the game, and it was a new challenge to write sort of happy, chilled Sonic the Hedgehog music that was cool. It's like a palate cleanser, I guess, between all the of other games.
I mean, I was going to say, because, like you said with the stabby neck thing, I mean, it's like, you can only do so much of that before you're like, cool, this is stabbed in the neck, take 5 of 700. Like it's, you eventually want to do something that, because I think that's what surprises a lot of people is that, you may be objected or, against trying to be like, oh, well, we've got this fun, cutesy game that you want to work on, and you're looking at it for the distance thinking, oh, God, what am I getting myself into? But then you start working and you start exploring and you're like, oh, man, I'm getting to use like instruments and sounds that I never got to use. Like, this is so cool. Yeah. Is that something that you think moving forward you would still actively seek? Would you still want to try those projects?
Yeah, I mean, as much as I love, like I say, all this darker, more aggressive tone, I mean, just doing that forever would be you're going to lose interest in it. And so, I mean, that's kind of a nice thing with Sumo Nottingham that I, I said, do the audio lead and composing for. That we do a lot of work for other companies, and you never know what's coming in and what new musical challenge that'll be, and it's nice. It's like a sort of a spin the wheel, and what is it that we're doing? It's like, oh, cool, okay, so we're doing some job now, and that's great. And I like that wild card element to my composing, because the stuff I choose for my freelancing or the people that I'm speaking to talking about work, I tend to be heading towards like Wolfenstein and Cyberpunk, because they're the kind of games that I've got a real passion for. So it's cool when you get this crazy other element from Sumo, and gives me opportunities to work on these very different titles like that. It's really cool.
I mean, in essence, now that Cyberpunk is kind of, I mean, there's probably still stuff you're going to be doing, post-release that, you're going to be working on that you can't talk about. But then beyond that, what do you think is like, for you, what is the dream project? I mean, what's the tippity top of the mountain? What do you think is something that, you could die happy if you worked on it?
Do you know what? I don't know. I mean, I've already...
It's a difficult question, is.
I've worked on... Already, I'm looking back at my the games I've worked on. There's ones that I'm so proud of already. There's no one sort of, Moby Dick for me. Obviously, there's things like Grand Theft Auto, just because it's such sort of another one of like Cyberpunk, like top of the tree of games that it would just be cool to be involved in. I think Mortal Kombat would always be a lot of fun just because it's so comically violent and horror film styling and stuff. But there isn't really any one game that I could, hey, I've done that now. I think I like that I get deep into a project and everything about it, and I get really obsessed with the games that I work on. I get really, really into them, and the sort of the fiction of them and stuff. But then when a new one comes along, I get just as excited about the new ones as well. I think it's kind of exciting not knowing what they're going to be, and I'm just super excited to see, especially with the Cyberpunk under my belt now. That's going to be really helpful to get future work. So I have absolutely no idea. Well, besides one that I've done already, it's coming out next year. But
okay.
I can't talk about that yet. But
no, of course, yeah.
But yeah, moving on from that, I don't know what's next. But yeah, all of them are awesome. It's like working at this level is just so exciting. I'll forever feel like just grateful, and I have no idea how I got here.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Like it's you always think or hope to have that, the status where you've worked on these great and amazing franchises and IPs, but then when it eventually hits, sometimes it can be great because, you've been waiting that long time for it to finally happen. But then there is always the feeling that, well, that's great. What's next? What's the next thing to do? What's the next thing to work on? So,
yeah,
you're never truly satisfied, right?
No, exactly. It's a funny situation with especially with the freelancing, because there's so many factors of just work coming through contacts and a bit of luck and chance and things like that. For all I know, I've had the height of my career and it's all downhill from here. I mean, yeah. I don't think so. I'm hardworking and I pursue work constantly and stuff. But I have absolutely no idea what happens next, and that's kind of exciting / completely terrifying.
It's such as the freelance world, unfortunately. That's just how it's structured. Yeah. Well, yeah, I think it's a great point to kind of end on, Ross. But yeah, I think it's a great instance of aesthetics you've had over your career. And I think, now that Cyberpunk has landed and, the word's out there and people can read the credits, I think, you're probably going to be inundated with stuff, which I think is great because, like you said, you want to stay busy, you want to be doing different things. So yeah, I think I think this episode is going to inspire a lot of people, and I think it's going to definitely attract a new audience and hopefully, help people who want to get in the industry get into the industry. I mean, I think definitely. I think the only thing I would want to try and end on is maybe just, it's probably hard to summarize in maybe 3 or 4 minutes, but what would you say is one of the key things you would look for people getting in the industry now in sound design and composing? What do you think is something that would help the next generation follow behind you?
Well, I think importantly, it's the industry. It can feel a little daunting and a little like the wall is too high to get into it for somebody that's just made up their mind they want to become a sound designer or composer. But it's not the case at all. Like even the biggest audio teams in the world are made up of rarely more than like 20 guys. Quite often it'll be 2 or 3 guys, and we're just musicians and audio fanatics and stuff, and everyone involved in the games industry tends to be very friendly people. So I mean, just if people work on their music, get any kind of examples of their music onto YouTube and stuff like that. Like you have to start somewhere, and people looking to hire sound designers, composers appreciate that you not everybody's had the chance to work on a game yet. So there's no snootiness about that. Like if you have to strip all the sound out of the trailer and redo the sound just to prove your skills, then that's completely fine. So just do work, get good at it, and find a voice, and then just send it to companies and stuff. You stand a decent chance for being heard by the right people. So these companies aren't as massive and terrifying and corporate as you think. It's people like me sitting in an office with their friends making video games. So. Yeah.
Oh well. I mean, that's definitely. I think that's a good way to phrase it, Ross. I think I know, especially for me, even in the 2D or 3D field, that people do think, well, I don't have this experience or I don't have this, accolade on my CV. But I think as long as you make good work, people will always find you. I think that's always going to be the case. So yeah. So I mean, just to say thanks, Ross, for coming on.
It's been really awesome, really interesting to chat to you.
Yeah, man, you too. Really, really thankful that you gave up your time to speak to us. For anybody who is still listening, thank you for being here. I'll leave all of Ross's social medias and descriptions and everything down below. If you want to find him or reach out to him, all his contact info will be there as well. So, I'm sure he's always open to questions or feedback, as long as you're always polite, of course, as always stipulate. And then, if you're looking to hire him again, all his links will be below. I'll leave SoundCloud, Spotify's, anything I can. And just check him out. This is probably going to be the last episode coming up to the end of the year. My thanks to all my guests that I've had in 2020, even though it has been an absolute clusterfuck of a year. We're finally at the end. There seems to be light on the horizon, so I'm hoping next year, when I rejoin you for another episode, things will be slightly better. Check us out on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Stitcher. We are everywhere at this point. And just hopefully you guys have a really Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and we'll speak to you later. Thanks again to Ross. Thanks to you guys for listening, and we'll catch you later. Bye, guys.
Merry Christmas.